Hi, we continue in Genesis 24 today after the servant has watched Rebekah water the camels until they're finished drinking, sitting in silence to determine whether the mission that he'd been sent on had been made successful. So we pick up in verse 22, as you can see on the left side of the screen, after the camels had finished drinking. And as we do, I noted last time that I'd found the little chiasm that I presented from 11 to 15, and noted near the end of the last video that I hadn't seen any other chiasms yet, but not surprisingly there are. One that goes from 12 to 27, as we'll look at in a minute, and a little loose one here from 22 to 30, which you can see on the bottom on the left side of the screen, but I'll put it up in a little bigger print in just a minute. On the right side of the screen, we're continuing to follow what we'll be seeing in the second half of the chapter, which is how the scenes that we're seeing in the first half are replicated, sort of, in repeated speech in the second half. So we saw first the conversation between Abraham and the servant that will be retold later, and now we're seeing what we saw last time and we'll see this time, which is the conversation between the servant and Rebekah that will be told later. And what we're doing in that is using people like Meyer Sternberg and Menachem Perry's work over the last half century, really, to highlight how the Bible works when it uses repeated speech, as well as what it does when it uses gaps, which are the spaces that the narration or the character speech leaves open for readers to interpret. And that's what the tradition of Jewish Midrash has long been about, the filling in of some of those gaps, not with right answers or truths, as in more of a Christian Platonic way of reading that happened among the church fathers, where they tried to find actual answers, but just in the conversation and the play of the text in the very Jewish mode to try to extract more information and get readers and speakers to engage in the story and experience in their own lives where God might be and the kind of issues that are going on. So that's part of what the technique of the text is and the interpretation that we'll be looking at as we go. And as we do, we've been noting this chapter contains a huge number of key words. It's the longest chapter in Genesis and the longest continuous scene. And so it isn't surprising that in 67 verses there are a number of words that are used a number of times, but they're often linked into small subsets, and that helps us see the small subsets. And when words are repeated, that provides the possibility for chiasms, because chiasms are based on the idea that they're repetitions of words or thematic repetitions that form that sort of concentric view that makes a chiasm. So in our passage here, when the camels had finished drinking, we're down here, right here, and in this section right now. And so it's near the end of the questions of the drawing and the drinking, and then it's setting up what we're going to be seeing here. So let's leave that up as we begin to enter in our passage. And as we do, I'd like to just remind us of where we were in the last verse. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. So what we're doing is seeing the narrator is giving us the servant's perspective, repeatedly referred to as the man here. I didn't highlight the, because man is used more times than that, but the man we see repeatedly. He's never named anywhere in the story, despite the fact that the Midrash and many modern interpreters assume it's Abraham's servant Eleazar, who is mentioned back in Genesis 15. But the text doesn't say that, and one of the great principles of the Bible that I understand, not only in the Hebrew Bible but in the New Testament, is that the text doesn't tell you something, it's for a reason. Just like the absence of a name of the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John, whole books have been written to try to figure that out. The point is it's anonymous. And similarly here, the servant does not have a name. And what we'll discover in this scene is neither does Rebekah, at least in the experience of the servant. But I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so let's jump right in. So here is the large chiasm from 12 to 27, and it's a 5-part chiasm, or really a 9-part chiasm, if you will, all the way to the E level. And so as you can see, it's framed with the servant talking about Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham, in the possibility as he encounters the women at the well in the beginning, and in the conclusion after he's determined that Rebekah is the right one. Then there's his proposal that she would offer her jar in the water of the camels, and that's echoed on the other side by her actual offer of the place to spend the night. Then we hear her name in the C part out of her mouth, and then we hear it repeated in verses 23 and 24, slightly different, as we'll look at, but enough to make a chiasm. And then the D parts, we see his drink and the offer to water the camels, and then the other side, the camels finished drinking. So we see that verse 21 there is the center of our chiasm, which is not surprising, because that's exactly the question that's on his mind, is his point of view of whether Yahweh has made the journey successful or not. But I'd also like to suggest we see this from Rebekah's standpoint. because although the text is focusing on the servant's standpoint and thereby Abraham's standpoint in absentia, Rebekah is an important character, and we can also look at it from her perspective, as Menachem Perry has helped us to do as well. So let's begin to listen to verse 22 from what she would hear. So when the camels had finished drinking, after she's engaged in this laborious activity for who knows how long, the man took, and as my note below says, it doesn't say he put them on her yet. It's as if he's holding them until she says who she is to make sure he gets the right answer. But the Midrash is split on whether he gave them before finding her out her identity. And this classic painting here really shows that. And I have to admit that until I was working on this passage in preparation for these videos and working on Radical Bible, over the years I had assumed he'd put the nose ring and the bracelet on her. So it just goes to show how careful reading is really important, that we don't make assumptions. So as this image shows, he's got it in his hand in front of her, and let's look at the details here. Gold twice here, again with the shekels, and we've heard earlier that there was gold in the Garden of Eden story, and there was gold that Abraham was rich in, as well as silver that he got from Pharaoh. The nose ring we hear, as Westerman notes, is a common female ornament from Egypt to India, but there's a couple of references to it that are important, and I'd like to highlight those, especially this from Ezekiel, where the issue is giving nose rings and bracelets, at least metaphorically, to Israel. Let's go back and look at that. This is Yahweh speaking. I adorned you with ornaments. I put bracelets on your arms, a chain on your neck, a ring on your nose, earrings in your ears, a beautiful crown upon your head. You were adorned with gold and silver, etc. But then it goes on to say you played the whore. And obviously this is not parallel to suggest anything negative about Rebekah. But to the extent that Rebekah is literally the mother of Israel, her son Jacob will become Israel himself, it shouldn't be considered that this is too far from that passage here, that the gold nose ring and the bracelets at least echo and if Genesis is from exile or post-exile, they would also hear from Ezekiel there, that being ornamented here is a beautiful thing, but it involves responsibility to stay faithful, although not faithful here to the servant as such, but that involves going deeper into the story of Rebekah, and we'll get there when we get there. So weighing a half a shekel, and it's interesting here, mishkalav here is a different word than the shekel we heard in chapter 23 from my note below in the purchase of the cave and the field. Here it's the word that's used 49 times in the Masoretic text, but only one other time, and that's in the Joseph story there. So it's interesting that although the noun for shekel is a similar word for the verb to weigh, because the word for shekel means to weigh, it's not primarily a money word, it's primarily a weight word. It's a different word than we heard in 23. And here it's weighing a half shekel, a beka, which is also connected to Exodus. And let's look at that because that's an interesting comparison here. In 38:6 here, a beka, and described even by the narrator here, that is half a shekel measured by the sanctuary shekel as part of the census there. And as the note below suggests from the Midrash, that these two uses from Exodus and here from Genesis are connected with the idea that Rebekah is the root of the nation that would receive Torah, which of course is to say Israel, where the Hebrew words of the Ten Commandments are 172 words, matching the numerical value of Beka. And as I've been trying to note in these videos on the Hebrew Bible, this is just one of those examples where at least the Midrashic scholars assume that the authors of these texts engage in these kind of in-depth connections that between the numerical value of letters or counting syllables or counting words within verses that really allow readers to go much more deeply. It's as if we're looking at the fingerprint patterns on somebody and seeing how those are similar to some other pattern on their body to make connections. It's really this very close-up, intimate view that is rewarded if you engage in it. It's so different than what most people do if they just say, here's a passage, what do you think? So, continuing with our passage, and two bracelets here, we see it in our passage here, and we see it also in the Ezekiel passage as we just looked at, weighing 10 gold shekels, which is a lot. And 10 asara here, which is a wordplay on Sarah, bringing up Sarah in our mind, who's now dead and buried, but just keeping her in mind here as the matriarch who precedes Rebekah, who's in a sense shoes Rebekah is being weighed to fit. And so having done that now, as K. Vermeulen notes here in this verse, the use of mono and disyllabic words creates a fast rhythm. We can see it here from the Hebrew taken from Bible Hub. Even if you can't read the Hebrew, you can certainly see how these words are a series of short words, and Vermeulen suggests have a calming and smoothing effect on listeners here. So I won't read it in the Hebrew, but you can imagine that there as we hear the English. Tell me whose daughter you are. Literally declare, please. And notice he's not asking her name. He doesn't say, who are you? Just simply tell me whose daughter you are, which is an assumption in a patriarchal situation, but he's also looking to see if she's part of the family of Abraham. Notice he doesn't ask that. He doesn't lead her with, I'm here representing somebody named Abraham. Might you be related to him? He doesn't give her any information at all about who he is, simply asking her who she is. So what might this look like from her perspective? This strange man comes up with 10 camels. He asks for a sip of water. She offers it. She offers to water the camels, and she does. Then he brings out this expensive jewelry and asks whose daughter she is, and then continues, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? And as Perry asks, who is the us? At this point, we don't know if there's anybody besides him and the camels. We'll find that out in a few verses. There are other people, but we don't know that yet. She presumably sees them. They're presumably there with him, but we don't. And so as readers, and maybe as Rebekah, we think the us is him and her. It's an intimate invitation for him to spend the night with her. It's certainly an ambiguity there, and it doesn't have to be heard that way, but it certainly could be heard that way, because she has no reason at this point that he represents somebody else, let alone somebody else's son. She would just assume, as we looked at last time, that anybody who comes up and asks for a sip of water from her and has all these camels is looking for a wife for himself. So from her perspective, there's a potential suitor here. So he asks, is there room, or literally a place, in your father's house? Notice it assumes there is a father's house, since he knows nothing about her and has never been to this land, and Abraham certainly hasn't been back in over 75 years, literally, something like that. He left when he was 75, and we don't know exactly how old he is now, but he's going to die at 175. So if Isaac is roughly 40 here, then Abraham's 140. So doing the math, he's been gone for over 70 years, and who knows if his father's brother or anybody from her family is still alive or not. So the servant is presuming there's a father's house, and there is, but he doesn't know that. For us to spend the night, using the word lalian here, and the Midrash notes the contrast with what she says here, a different form of the word, but goes both ways. It can be that he's asking for a single night, and she generously offers multiple nights, or he asks for several nights, assuming after a long journey he'd need more than one night, and she only offers one night for fear that he would be exposed to the idolatry of the place. So it's a beautiful thing about Midrash that they can read those things either direction without suggesting that one is right and one is wrong. Both those possibilities can be understood in the text. So this is what we hear her say. And as Wenham notes, Rebekah answers the servant precisely. She does not volunteer her own name. And as I note below, from Rebekah's point of view, it is she who actively chooses her future bridegroom and decides he will be invited to her father's house. Now she has to bow to the cultural norms, and hence must excite her greedy brother and make him believe that he is the initiator of the invitation. This from Menachem Perry. So she says, I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And as my note here below has, the tension between patriarchy and matriarchy is evident in Rebekah's testimony. She strongly identifies herself through her grandmother and brings the stranger to her mother's, not her father's house. She does not wait for her father or brother to extend hospitality, yet while we celebrate her independence, her marriage is still arranged for her. This from Miguel de la Torre, the great Latin American liberation theologian here. So, son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor, and that brings up the lineage things that we were looking at earlier. And note how the verse in 24 chiastically matches the one in 15 that we saw last time. But notice what she leaves out. We heard earlier, born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the woman of Nahor, Abraham's brother. This from the narrator. She leaves out Abraham altogether from this, because why should she mention Abraham? She's about her immediate family here. She's there in Haran because Nahor, her grandfather, was there. But she has no reason to think that Abraham is part of the story because she doesn't know who the servant is. So she's not making the connection to Abraham. She's simply making the connection to her immediate lineage. And then she added, we have plenty of straw and fodder here. Straw, the word teven, only a little later in Genesis in the retelling. And as Vermeulen notes again, she explicitly mentions the availability of fodder for the animals even before the sleeping place, although no such inquiry was sought. Did the servant in his happiness forget to care for Abraham's camels? And did Rebekah, polite as she was, gently remind him by mentioning plenty of food for them? It's a nice little note. Straw, of course, would be bedding, not so much food. The word for fodder here, mispo, is always the word for animal food in all these other places in Genesis and in Judges for donkey fodder. And this place to spend the night. Again, whether that's more days or fewer days depends on your perspective. So as we come near the end of our passage here, suddenly we get back to the man's perspective, even though we haven't heard any emotion from her. We don't know if she's happy about this or sad about this or just simply informational. She's answering his questions, but we really can't tell yet whether she's excited about this or she's just providing polite responses, and we'll have to wait and see how that goes. So a little suspense there about whether she's open to what hasn't been stated but is implied. So the man bowed his head and worshipped. Two different verbs here. The second one here in this form in Vayasherachu is used generally for bowing and worshiping, but as the Midrash suggests that the bowing is bowing his head, and the word for worshiping is full prostration. And it suggests the bow from the head indicates intellectual submission or agreement with the point being made, and full prostration indicates total submission. So he's doing both here. He's bowing his head, accepting her answer, and prostrating to recognize what he says in the next verse, that his mission has been made successful. And so as he continues in verse 27, proclaiming, now for her to hear as well as for us to hear, blessed be Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham. And now this is the first time she's hearing this. About Yahweh, that the person who's talking to her worships somebody named Yahweh, and that this Yahweh is the God of his master Abraham, who presumably she knows is the brother of her grandfather, but does she? We have no reason to know that specifically, but it'd be fair enough to assume that she knows something about the family that was separated in previous generations and has gone off somewhere else. But we don't hear her response to this immediately until he finishes speaking. So Yahweh, the God of my master Abraham, framing with verse 12 at the chiasm, who has not forsaken his chesed and hesed ve'emet, steadfast love and faithfulness, or steadfast love and truth here. Emet can also be translated truth. It's an important phrase used in the prophets and other places, and it's interesting that it's first here from the mouth of someone who is not a Yahwist, who's simply naming Yahweh as the God of his master twice, as we've heard here. And yet, in many ways, this little hendiadys of chesed ve'emet, which we hear many times in the Psalms and elsewhere, is the full expression of who God is, love and truth, or grace and truth as it's translated in the prologue of the Gospel of John, full of grace and truth. So here we hear it from this servant of, as we'll see, somewhat questionable character, but I'm getting ahead of ourselves. So as for me, which is interesting, this is the first person pronoun, anoki here, which is unusual to put. As some commentators have said, the syntax is complex here or confused. So I was suggesting it could be, I have been led by Yahweh on the way, but the medieval Midrashist Roddick suggests, while I was still on the way. So Yahweh has led me while I was still on the way. But the first person form, Anoki, is emphatic here, and we'll hear it from her when we continue after this. So Yahweh has led me on the way to the house of my master's kin, literally my master's brothers, plural. Even though only one is alive, we know that Haran, the third of the three brothers, died earlier, and that only Nahor was also in the city of Haran, while Abraham went obviously with Canaan and took Lot with him. So it's the house of my master's brothers, even though we only have a sense of one brother there. And I want to remind again that just because the servant assumes the causation that Yahweh has done this leading, we as readers have to be questionable about that, and always keep in mind that correlation is not causation. The fact that he showed up here and that Rebekah showed up does not mean that Yahweh is making this happen. The narrator hasn't said so, and Yahweh hasn't spoken directly. So it's really a test of how characters in the story discern whether Yahweh is part of something or not. And we see that not only in Genesis, but also in texts like the monarchy text in my Samuel series, where certainly people involved in powerful situations want to claim Yahweh is on their side. And I want to raise that here because it'll be a very important rhetorical part of what the servant will do in the retelling to Laban to try to convince him that this isn't just a human situation, but that the great God has made this happen, and to fight against it is to fight against God. But meanwhile, the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things, and that's where we'll meet Laban and see where it goes next time. See you then for that. Bye-bye.